Buenos días. Estoy muy feliz de estar aquí en su hermoso país, en esta hermosa ciudad, para explorar este tema tan importante que es la educación y orientación profesional. Aunque estudié español como asignatura optativa en el instituto y recuerdo muchas palabras, sin el traductor Google ya no soy capaz de unir estas palabras en frases comprensibles, por lo que lamentablemente tengo que impartir esta sesión en inglés. I want to thank the Bertelsmann Foundation very much for inviting me to be here, supporting this very impressive work that you are doing. I want to thank Javier for providing us with such a beautiful buffet, starting with the cocktail and going all the way to dessert. And of course, I want to thank all of you for your interest in this very, very important topic. I've been asked to share some experiences from Canada, which I'm very happy to do, and I'll be interspersing a little bit of international perspectives as well. So I've included on this opening slide some very Canadian images, including my hometown, which is the one in the middle, where you see we have the longest skating rink in the world. We have a canal that runs through our city, and you can skate for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers. So I invite each and every one of you to come and visit Canada someday and enjoy all that it has to offer, all of our hospitality, just as I am very much enjoying being here in your beautiful country. So in research and development, we are always urged to start with the end in mind. So if you are developing a program or a new initiative, start by understanding what you hope that program will achieve in terms of outcomes, and then work backwards to purpose build in order to achieve those outcomes. The same is true in program evaluation. If you're going to evaluate a program, you always want to first understand the outcomes it's supposed to achieve and then build your evaluation methodology to actually measure those things. So I'd like to start with some questions that takes that best practice of starting with the end in mind and apply it to our lens in education. And so my question to you is, what outcomes do you most want for the young people you love? When you think about your sons, your daughters, your nieces, your nephews, your neighbors, your grandchildren, what do you hope education will give them? When they leave education, in what ways do you hope they're going to be different than they were when they started their compulsory education? What outcomes do you believe are most important to position them for a good life as adults who will be navigating the world beyond compulsory education? I believe that these are universally important questions, and they are questions that should be considered by policymakers, by funders, by administrators, educators, counselors, and by all of us as parents and aunts and uncles and neighbors and grandparents. So when I think about my own daughter, there she is when she was little. She's now in her last year of university. What I most wanted for her from her compulsory education was not closely tied with what was given the most airspace and the most emphasis in her schooling. In Canada, our curriculum, especially in the senior years, is very crowded. There is a strong, strong emphasis on teaching content, more content, more content. But she holds endless content in her pocket. In today's disrupted labor market, what she's really needing is a heightened degree of self-awareness and labor market awareness, new skills and new strategies. So my dream for her was much less about content and much more about connection. I think that educational systems that are based on consumption, based on more and more and more content, are really being challenged, certainly in Canada and internationally. Increasingly, we're seeing these educational systems being compelled to shift from consumptive models, where our students are being given information to consume, to ones that are much more grounded in connection, helping students to build interconnected skills and strategies that will equip them to be lifelong learners, helping students to connect the academic content that they are learning, to connect that to themselves and to the world around them and potential working lives, helping students to connect who they are with what they're learning with possible futures, and to use all of that to make some informed decisions about their next steps after compulsory education. And so what I wanted for our daughter was to understand how learning connected to her, how the world around her was connected to her, and the possible futures that lay in front of her. I wanted her to be an intentional learner, an informed decision maker, and to realize that school was in fact a privilege. It wasn't something that she had to do because I told her, or her teachers told her, or because it was compulsory. It was in fact in service to her and her future. I wanted her to understand that education was preparing her for her next steps. So what I wanted for her was an education that was focused around her career development, and her future. So think about what you most want for the young people that you love. And with these outcomes in mind, I'd like to take a look briefly at what the research tells us are the impacts of quality career guidance. So this slide is very crowded. It's crowded on purpose because we actually have a very extensive body of evidence that demonstrates the impacts of career development, career guidance. The short-term educational impacts, the medium-term labor market impacts, and the long-term life impacts. And so I'd like to spend the next little while unpacking those impacts for you. So let's start with educational outcomes. Even if you are devoted to the importance of academics, which I am, even if that is your driver, what you believe is the driver for education, career guidance is still a very smart investment because it serves as almost like a jetpack, that propels students to greater achievement. We know that career education and guidance increases student engagement and persistence in education. According to the research, student engagement peaks around 10 or 11 years old. So students are very engaged in primary school. They think their teachers are cool. They want to be there. And from about the age of 10 or 11, student engagement goes down, down, down. So why do you think that is? What happens at around that age? If you think about the young people that you've known that are about 10 or 11 years old, what starts to happen? They start to ask, why? Why do I have to make my bed? Why do I have to eat vegetables? And to their teachers, they are asking, why do I need to learn this? And I think that as an educational system, we have failed in providing compelling answers to that question. So career education provides those answers. Guidance provides those answers. It connects learning to what matters to the students, to a future that matters to them. So when students understand that learning is a building block to their future, their motivation, their clarity of purpose, and their confidence increase. So too does their engagement with school and their persistence to graduation. A Canadian randomized controlled trial looked at exactly this issue, and we looked at outcomes for students who had received career guidance or a financial incentive, so actually been given money to go to post-secondary education, either received both of those or none of them. So there were 4 cohorts in the study. Career guidance, financial incentive, both or neither. What we found was that career guidance yielded a 10 percentage point increase in post-secondary enrollment, who were 50% more likely than members of the control group to continue in their education. And this increase reduced the gap between the low-income participants and their more advantaged peers by 70%. That's an impressive outcome that really underpins the role of career guidance in not only improving educational persistence, but also contributing to equity and social justice goals. It's worth noting that once a student is disengaged, so once a student has become NEET or has dropped out, curriculum is not going to re-engage them. Curriculum is not going to reignite the spark in them that makes them want to go back to education. They need something that reaches them as a person, and that glimmer, when it is almost extinguished, curriculum is not going to reignite it. Career development can. We know that quality career education and guidance also contributes to better performance in schools. Once students understand why they're learning, they're no longer in school just to please others. They are there because they understand that it's advancing their own goals and aspirations. And the result is better grades. A student who understands that compulsory education is connected to the real world that they're going to live and work in, and that it is a stepping stone to their future, that is a student who is invested in excelling in school. We know that career education and guidance results in more skilled graduates. Keeping up with technical skill requirements is a bit of a losing battle in this labor market. Technical skill requirements are changing so rapidly that our education system is having a very hard time keeping up. So increasingly, we're recognizing the need for foundational skills that cut across occupations, that position students to be lifelong learners and position them to know how to navigate within a labor market, no matter what job they're doing. And so in Canada, we've adopted, this is the model that we have adopted, it's called the Skills for Success, and you'll see it includes things like literacy and numeracy, but also includes those broader foundational skills that really help people to learn well and to work effectively, regardless of their occupation. So the trick, however, is that these skills are rarely taught through traditional pedagogy. You can't sit somebody down and teach them in a traditional way how to be a good communicator. They are developed in context, through application, through practice. And again, we know from the research that quality career guidance is an effective and efficient way to actually help foster the development of these incredibly vital skills that, at least in Canada, what employers tell us, that these are the skills that they're looking for, because the technical skills, they can train, they can deal with those because they're changing all the time anyways, but those foundational skills are critical. In a recent study, we tracked changes in participants' mastery across all of these skills for success. It was a career development program that the intended outcome was actually not skill development. It was we had built the program to achieve a variety of other outcomes, but to our surprise, what we saw were significant growth across all of the skills for success, including, surprisingly to us, literacy and numeracy, in a way that was garnering bigger skills development than some of the programs that were specifically intended to build these skills. So career development is a really strong investment if you're interested in skills development. So now let's look at some of the medium and longer term labor market outcomes. Not surprisingly, quality career guidance improves employment outcomes for students, especially those who are most at risk of not succeeding in entering or being able to navigate across the labor market. According to the OECD, students vary considerably in the extent to which they can visualize and plan for their future, with the most disadvantaged being the most at risk. And schools really can democratize opportunity by ensuring access to career education, helping all students to navigate their paths through education and beyond into and across the world of work. So our research suggests that career development strategies make a significant positive impact on employment, particularly for those who are marginalized and distant from the labor market. We know that career guidance supports stronger workplace satisfaction and productivity. It helps students to discern among work options, making informed decisions based on alignment with self and the labor market. And when this happens, people are more likely to be productive and happy workers, which in turn creates more happy and prosperous workplaces and stronger economies. So a recent study showed that when they looked at a whole range of factors, career development in the workplace was actually the #1 contributor to decreasing churn and turnover and increasing retention in the workplace. We know that career guidance leads to higher earnings. Economist Laisha Renee followed the money trail, the statistics, for students who had participated in the longitudinal study that I referenced earlier. So now these students who had received career guidance or financial aid were followed 10, 12 years later, and so now they're about 28, 29 years old. And she found that access to career guidance in their compulsory years not only reduced disparities in progression to higher education for at-risk students particularly, interestingly enough, more than financial aid did. So these were students who came from low socioeconomic households where finances were a barrier to post-secondary, and yet career guidance was a stronger impact on their going to post-secondary higher education and staying in higher education than financial aid. She also found that career guidance increased these young people's income as they moved into their 20s and into their early 30s. According to Renee's research, students who received career guidance in compulsory education earned approximately $2,700 per year more, a 10% increase in income by their late 20s compared to their counterparts who didn't receive career guidance. This nets a benefit of $50,000 per student from higher income and tax revenues. So if you're only interested in money, career guidance is still a good investment. Studies have linked career programming to substantial decreases in reliance on social assistance and positive impacts on recidivism among incarcerated people. So if you look across, when you think about governments and the most expensive costs that they incur, social assistance costs, the social justice system, addictions, mental health, what we're seeing in our research are reductions in costs across some of those budget lines that are the biggest drain on government budgets. And so finally, keeping in mind those outcomes that you most want for the young people that you care about, we also know that career development supports stronger health. Before working in career development, career guidance, I worked for over a decade in mental health. And I worked with people who had been diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness that was quite resistant to treatment. Almost everyone that I worked with lived in poverty and were isolated from their communities. And almost all of them had been at one point or another deemed either unteachable in the school system or unemployable in the labor market. And what I saw was that often the traditional mental health interventions had relatively limited impact with this group of people. But when I could help them to begin to see themselves a little bit differently in terms of a possible future, when I could help them to imagine a time in their life down the road where perhaps they were contributing even a little bit through some kind of learning, whether it was formal or informal, or some kind of work, whether it was paid or unpaid. When that spark was ignited and they were able to get out of their homes and into community in some way, formal, informal, paid, unpaid, it had a massive impact on their health. It didn't change their diagnosis. They still had a mental illness and it was still at times debilitating. but their quality of life improved immensely. They were now, sometimes were able to alleviate some of the most extreme impacts of poverty because they were working a little bit. They were connected to people in ways that just wasn't so before when they were feeling so isolated. And importantly, it began to shift how they saw themselves. People who struggle with mental illness often see themselves as just a burden to society. And being able to shift that a little bit and see themselves as a contributor as well had a massive impact on their overall health and their quality of life. And all of a sudden, I saw them starting to take better care of themselves physically, starting to eat better, starting to be in contact with people and be stimulated through those social contacts. And so since then, that really was what brought me into the career development field. I saw that the impacts of a career intervention was, in fact, more powerful than many of the tailor-made mental health interventions that I was trained to deliver. So I started to get really curious about career development and moved into this field. And so at a time when youth mental health is such a top priority across so many departments, career guidance seems like an underutilized lever. And finally, closely tied to health is hope. I wish it wasn't true, but I suspect that each and every one of us in this room knows somebody who has lost hope. They may be at school or at work physically, but they are absent in every other way. They don't see the point anymore. They have stopped engaging in work or in life. And the spin-off costs of this disengagement, this loss of hope, whether it's psychological, social, and economic, are absolutely immense. The compulsory school years are the only time we actually have a captive audience. It's the one time where we have a chance to foster connection with young people. It's the one time when we have the chance to inspire them, to motivate them, to ensure that they move into adulthood informed, competent, and clear about their future, and hopeful about their capacity to achieve it. And so I would suggest that we cannot miss this one time. We cannot miss this chance. And so these are some of the outcomes that we know from the research emerged from quality career guidance. And now I'd like to explore a little bit about what constitutes quality. When we say quality guidance, what do we mean by quality? I will say that I've really delighted in reading the materials that you have developed through the Excellence Program. If you had seen me reading those reports, you would have seen me smiling and nodding my head in agreement with so much of what you've written. I was curious to what extent there was consistency between the keys, the claves, from the excellence model with our own Canadian framework and the UK Gatsby, and then I looked at several others. But as you'll see, there's a high degree of alignment between the work that you have done. And as I'll point out over the next couple of minutes, there's also some areas where you really have moved the marker forward for the whole international community. You said that you want to also be a model, and I would say that you are achieving that. So let me start by looking at the areas where we really agree. We certainly agree on the need for a stable, appropriately resourced guidance strategy that places students' career development at the center of education. Increasingly governments, I think, are really recognizing the essential contribution of career guidance to their immediate educational imperatives as well as broader socioeconomic goals. So in Canada, we've experimented with whole school approaches where it's everybody's job to attend to the career guidance of students, no matter what subject you're teaching. The understanding is that you're teaching it with an eye to how that subject connects to the student and connects to real-world opportunities in the labor market. In our experience in Canada, achieving this requires both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So absolutely, it's important that there be strong policy and that policy be clearly embedded and a legislated right. But policy alone is not the full answer. There also has to be support from the ground up. There has to be an emphasis on implementation and supporting those on the front lines of education in actually implementing the policy. So in our experience, it's absolutely critical to be both top-down and bottom-up. I think we agree very strongly in the need for a developmental and differentiated approach to guidance. We see it as lifelong, but what happens in guidance is not the same thing in primary as it is in middle school, as it is in secondary, as it is in adulthood. As a young child, guidance is critically important, but not to help them make decisions at this stage. At this stage, it's about broadening their horizons about what is possible. Often we work with young people who have limited role models of people who have worked in their lives. Perhaps neither parent works, perhaps they have limited exposure to people who work. So they might understand that opportunities for their future could include a teacher because they see teachers, maybe a doctor, maybe a social worker, maybe a police officer, but their view of the possible is very limited. And so in primary, the job of career guidance is to expand the art of the possible and expand their horizons around possible futures for themselves. And then, of course, it evolves, as they become more self-aware and able to look inward and understand who they are. Career guidance focuses more on that and ultimately starts to build toward their transition from compulsory education to the world beyond. We all agree on the importance of schools opening up their doors. Javier talked about that. Ensuring that students gain exposure to and experience in the world beyond the classroom. So one of the things that we have done in elementary schools that is developmentally appropriate is invite parents and community members into the school to talk about what they do and to ideally show kids what they do and let them try it out. We call them human libraries. And so instead of taking out a book, the young student takes out a person and they're able to get a sense of what they do. And not only is it developmentally appropriate, it's expanding their horizons of what's possible and the kind of work that happens right underneath their noses in their communities, but it also breaks down that artificial barrier between schools and the community around it. So any opportunity that you have to bring community into the school and bring students out into community is an important thing to do. One of the programs that we have in Canada is called Career Trek, and it's focused on young people who are highly at risk of leaving school. And every Saturday, they go and visit higher education campuses and workplaces. And so the little boy who thinks that he wants to be a vet, he actually goes into an animal surgery and faints at the sight of blood and realizes that that's not for him. And the little girl who wants to be an engineer all of a sudden is talking with other young women who are engineers and getting a color commentary on what it's really like to be a woman in engineering. And these kinds of interactions, and importantly the relationships that get fostered through them, are so vital in breaking down those walls between schools and the world that young people are inevitably going to be moving into after school. It's also worth considering where we see some subtle differences between your claves, your keys, and some of the other international models. So I strongly, strongly support your emphasis on strategical and operational coordination. That did not appear in our framework, and it didn't appear in Gatsby or frankly any of the others that I looked at. We have a system not unlike yours. You have 17 regions. I think we have 13. So 13 different governments, 13 different educational systems with different rules and different standards. And that's not to mention, partners in municipalities, in school boards, in professional associations, in unions, and there's a myriad of interest holders when it comes to supporting the future of young people, and coordination is critically, critically important. I also note that you have a strong emphasis on family engagement, which again did not appear in either our framework, I wish it did, or the Gatsby. In one of the randomized control trial that I talked about, one of the career interventions was geared not just to the student, but also to their parent or guardian. And so they participated in the career education workshop with the students and also had some support independently themselves. We have made many, many attempts to engage parents over the years, and many of them have failed, to be honest. And it's a strange thing because, any of you who are parents in the room, you know that you want more than anything else for your young person to succeed and be supported. And yet, it's a struggle. So I think the things that we have learned on this front is start early, where all of us as moms and dads are at the school picking up our kids in primary, and we're talking with the teachers, and we're much more present in the school in the early years. And so to start engaging parents early, and then don't lose them along the way is something that has worked for us. I would say look for existing structures. In Canada, we have parent councils. I don't know if you have that here, but anywhere where you can connect with parents where they already are gathering, and keep the ask simple. Like the Human Library was very simple. Just come and talk about what you do. In Canada, we have put a bit stronger emphasis. I read it in the report, for sure it's there, but anywhere where you can connect skill development with curriculum, and make it clear that career development is skill development. That has been a help for us. And we've put a lot more emphasis on training those that are delivering. It's not enough to be trained broadly as a counselor. Career development is a unique and distinct area of expertise, and training specifically in career development, in our experience, is critically important. And then the last area where I see some difference is on that focus on evaluation and return on investment. It is an area that we have placed a lot of emphasis in Canada. And, I would say that it has enabled us to make strong cases to our governments around the return on investment of quality career guidance. And I think it's always important to ask the question, not only what is the cost of investing in career guidance? I think we also have to ask ourselves, what is the cost of not investing in career guidance? And so, given all the evidence, we've got a big body of evidence here. Given all of that evidence, why is it not the center of education? Why is it not the biggest driver in education? Well, I would say in short, because change is hard. And the system has done things the same way for a long time, and it's hard to change systems, especially enormous, seemingly immovable systems like education. So if part of your role is trying to advance career education and guidance in your country, which I would say is a very noble and important mission, I would just leave you with a few final thoughts from our experience in Canada. The first is that every relationship matters. We had the opportunity to develop the benchmarks for career education in Canada. The only reason we were invited to do that really was that we had created a very strong relationship with a teacher, a classroom teacher. And she went on to become a counselor, and then she went on to be an advisor to the minister, and then she went on to be the head of the secretariat for the Council of Ministers. And she believed in career guidance because of the relationship that had been cultivated there, and made career guidance the key priority for the council. And so every relationship matters. I would say build your evidence and make the financial case. When we have numbers, when we're able to say we have demonstrated proof that career guidance has saved your regional government $20 million in the last 2 years, that opens doors. It opens doors to meetings that would not otherwise be opened. Once you get in, you're telling the stories of the impact of career guidance. Numbers don't matter so much once you're in the door, but they do matter to get in the door in the first place. I would say come with solutions, not problems. Policymakers, funders, politicians, let's face it, all of us, we have more than enough problems on our desk. They know the problems. What we need to do is bring them solutions. And I would say be prepared for the long game. So many of the things that we're now seeing happening in Canada were seeds that we planted 20 years ago, 15 years ago. It is a long game and it takes time. And I will leave you with my last, final thought is that I would encourage you to know that every investment of time, energy, or if you are a politician or a funder of money, every single euro you invest in career guidance is a wise investment that will have a multiplier effect on the young people that you love, on your families, on your community, and on your country. So with that, I say muchas gracias.